Thanks, Doctor. Thanks, man. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? I'm so excited to be at TED. Isn't this a fantastic conference? It's amazing. So many people at TED talk about passion today, and if you've ever seen some of the taped TED Talks that are available online, passion gets talked about a lot. Well, as Patrick is mentioning, I've got a 10-year-old daughter who's in 4th grade, and she's passionate about Japan. So my wife and I told her, look, we really think that we should go live in Japan. Now, my wife and I have lived here before, and we love it. We said, if you're really interested in it, we think it's important to indulge your passions. And my little girl, because she's got a big imagination and a lot of courage, she said, yeah, let's do it. It's a little scary to think that we're living here because that's what our then 9-year-old daughter wanted to do. But I think it was the right decision. And I'd like to tell you a little bit more about why. I'm really big on what I think of as indulging your passions. I've written 7 novels. I used to be a lawyer. I spent some time in the CIA. I've done a variety of interesting jobs. But nothing even compares to me, for me, to writing full-time. I just love it. And I didn't know at the time where my ideas and inspirations were coming from when I started out writing. But looking back, I think I have some ideas, and that's what I'd like to share with you today. Where does the inspiration come from? And as Thomas Edison said, is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. So how do you get that mix of inspiration and perspiration to make your ideas into something big? Well, I've always been pretty good about indulging my passions. I've had a lot of eclectic interests throughout my life. Some of them are a little bit weird. I got into martial arts when I was in high school, and in fact, my interest in some Japanese martial arts is what led to a larger interest in Japan. Martial arts, always been passionate about politics and government. What I like to think of as forbidden knowledge is something that's always interested me. Forbidden knowledge is something that governments don't want the general population to know. They want only a few select people to know about this stuff. Kinjirareta kinchi is I think maybe the right Japanese for it. So I've amassed a strange collection of books my whole life with weird titles like The Death Investigator's Handbook and 21 Techniques of Silent Killing and Contingency Cannibalism. Really weird books. You wouldn't think that these books would have any practical use, and hopefully they wouldn't. But these are subjects that have always interested me, so I just always read a lot. Weird stuff, political stuff, everything. Spent 3 years in the CIA where I got to learn some of that forbidden knowledge. That was an interesting experience. Also got a look at the way the government functions or misfunctions from the inside. That was also a really interesting and useful experience. And for anyone who's here who's thinking that the CIA is a kind of exotic, really squared away place, I don't want to disabuse you too much, but maybe the best way to think of the CIA is it's the government. So it's like the post office, but with spies. But still a very interesting and useful experience. And my wife and I moved to Tokyo in 1993 because I really wanted to train in judo at the Kodokan. This was a dream of mine. I told her I wanted to work at a Japanese law firm and that it would be really useful for my career. And I wouldn't say that was exactly an untruth, but what I really wanted to do was train at the Kodokan. And that's what I did. So 6 days a week, my poor wife was a judo widow. We were living in Sengoku. We were the only gaijin in Sengoku. And my wife didn't speak Japanese at the time. And I was doing judo 2 hours a night. But I was just so into it. Every night I was surrounded by these passionate people who came to the Kodokan from all over the world because they loved judo. They didn't care. They found a way to make it work. They worked in bowling alleys and gas stations. People from Malaysia and South Africa and Iran, everywhere. So you get this really passionate culture, and I got swept up in that. One morning on the way to work, on the subway on the way to work, I was actually at Otemachi Station on the Chiyoda-sen. An image came into my mind, a very clear, vivid image of 2 men following another man down Dogenzaka in Shibuya. And I still really don't know exactly where the image came from, but it was vivid and powerful, and it stayed with me throughout the day. So I started asking myself questions. Well, who are these guys? Why are they following this other man down the street? And then answers started to come. I realized they're assassins. They're going to kill that guy. And my wife likes to give me a hard time about this because she says that's a completely abnormal answer. It's like normal people would have a variety of answers. Maybe they want to help that guy. Maybe he dropped his wallet, something like that. I'm the only one who says, of course, they're going to kill him. But that's the way my mind works. And that's the way I envision that scene. So the answer is they're assassins. They want to kill him. But that only led to more questions. Well, why do they want to kill him? Who hired them? What did he do? And I started just instinctively asking more questions, and every time I came up with an answer, the answer would lead only to more questions. I started writing these things down, and it started to feel like a story. So I kept up with it, and to compress the whole thing, 8 years later, I sold the rights to what was then my first book, Rainfall, a 2-book deal. I was able to, it turned into a fairly big deal. We sold the rights in 10 countries, and I got to quit my day job, and I've been writing full-time ever since, which is an absolute joy for me. So looking back, I realized, I think, where did that idea, that image, come from? And I realized it came because there are things that interest me, things that might not seem to have that much practical value, like contingency cannibalism, for example. But they interested me, and so I'd always read about these things and think about them and make them part of every day, just about every day of my life. And somehow living in Tokyo provided a kind of spark. And I think all those pre-existing interests, those passions, were building up in my mind like kindling. Tokyo provided a spark, and my unconscious served up an image. And I think that's where inspiration comes from, or certainly where inspiration can come from. If you indulge those passions every day, if there are things that you love and care about, do those things, make them part of your life, and good things will come from that. Now, how do you go from there? Because we all have good ideas, but unfortunately, sometimes it just stops at the good idea phase. Like David was saying, sometimes you get a good idea in the shower. By the way, a little practical bit of advice you might find useful. It's been my experience that I do get these good ideas, good novel ideas all the time at weird times, working out, in the shower, in the grocery store. Whenever my mind is relaxed and wandering, something comes to me. But if I don't write the idea down right away, I almost always forget it. So now I write it down all the time. And the reason I think is this. I think when your mind, when your unconscious is serving up good stuff, your mind at that time is in a similar state to the state you're in when you're dreaming. And we all know that when you wake up from a dream, don't you remember? You can remember that dream at that moment, right? Right when you wake up from it, it's vivid in your mind. But if you don't write it down within a minute or 5 minutes at the most, the dream will be gone as your regular consciousness takes hold. But if you write the dream down, you can remember it. So whenever I have those good ideas, now I either use a dictaphone or write them down. That's helped me a lot. That instinctive process that I followed, asking questions about who are these guys, why are they going to kill this guy, what did he do, who, what, where, when, why, and how. I find these questions are incredibly useful guides. These questions are how stories get written, and they're useful not only for stories, but for anything you want to do, any way you want to live your life, any endeavor, any idea or inspiration you're trying to turn into a reality. These questions provide a roadmap. Now, I know this sounds a little bit obvious. One of the guys I lived with in college had a habit of saying things that were hilariously funny, but then when you pause to consider, you realize they were profound. And one day, my roommate Danny, he said, "God, man, the other night, I got so drunk, I woke up the next morning, I was so hungover that I didn't even know what questions to ask." And we all laughed. But then I thought about it, and I thought, that is when you're really in trouble. When you don't even know what questions to ask. You could wake up face down on the sidewalk here in Odaiba tomorrow morning, but if you know to ask, how did I get here? What happened? Even if you have to ask, who am I? That's a pretty basic question. But if you at least are asking, who am I? You have a shot. It might turn out okay. But if you don't even know to ask those questions, this story does not have a happy ending. So those are the most important questions. But for any idea, to make it a reality, any inspiration, to apply the perspiration to that inspiration so that it can become something real, it does take a lot of discipline. And this is another one that I look back and realize, where did I get the discipline to keep working on that manuscript for 8 long years? I didn't have a contract. I had a busy day job. No one really believed in me except, I like to think I certainly believed in myself, and my wife was encouraging, although she did also always encourage me not to quit my day job. So somewhere you have to find a way to keep going. And again, it doesn't have to be a manuscript. It can be anything. I mean, if you want to start any venture, if you want to learn a skill, it can be a martial art or a musical instrument, or you want to open a new business, you want to start a restaurant, you want to change something in your life. It's not something that can happen overnight. You have to stick with it. So how do you stick with it? Where does it come from? For me, it came from fear. I realized at some point that the thing that was motivating me to work on that manuscript whenever I had downtime, whenever I was on an airplane, whether it was late at night and I wanted to go to bed, or I was tempted to watch television or whatever, something gave me the impetus to instead work on the manuscript over the course of quite a few years. So what was it? It was this. I was afraid that if I didn't get published, that it would be my fault. I was never afraid that I wouldn't get published. I was only afraid that if I didn't get published, it would be my fault. That I was afraid that I might look back at my life from some point in the future and say, God, what would have happened if you'd finished that manuscript? I wonder what would have happened. And that thought, even now when I say it, it really gives me the creeps, because it would have been horrible to not have been published and have it be my fault. So I was determined to do the things that I could do to maximize my chances of getting published. I conceived of that as my job. My job wasn't to get published. My job was to do all the things that made it as likely as possible that I would get published. I'll tell you a really quick anecdote. I get to take some really cool courses to make sure that things are right and exciting and realistic in my books. And one of them was a combat shooting course. And one of the things I learned in this course is that it's a very common experience among law enforcement personnel. When they get in a gunfight, they're not expecting it, and suddenly there's a bad guy in the liquor store or whatever, and he's got a gun out. And what the cops will do initially is they get their gun out, and what they're thinking is things like, die, or hit him, shoot him. And the bullets are going everywhere, but nobody's getting shot. And then the training kicks in. And instead of focusing on that ultimate objective, which in this case is shoot the bad guy, their minds break it down into components that they can control, which are, in this case, like an aggressive stance, gorilla grip, front side on the target, roll the trigger. And when they start thinking about those components that they can control, suddenly the bad guy falls down. It's like magic. So I try to approach everything that way. And novel writing certainly lends itself to this kind of thing, but not just novel writing, everything. One last little anecdote, and it's about my daughter again, and it's part of the way we made the decision to come to Tokyo, and again, a way I try to approach things in life generally. When I say I was afraid that I would look back in the future and regret that I didn't finish the manuscript, my daughter and I were talking about, well, what do we do? She said, a little nervous. I'm going to have to leave my friends. I've never lived abroad, that sort of thing. And I said, we started talking about time travel. And she asked me once if I think that time travel is possible. And I said, I do. I don't think it's possible the way we usually conceive it in science fiction, where people travel to the past. But I do think that we can receive messages from the future through the power of our imagination. And that's what my daughter and I talked about. I said, no, I'm not trying to pressure you. This is a big decision, and it's going to be good no matter what we do. But how do you think you'll feel in a year if we haven't gone to Japan? Or how do you think you'll feel later in life if we don't do it? And she said, well, I don't think I'll feel good about that. I think I'll feel bad. And I said, that's a kind of message you're getting from your future self, who's much older and wiser than you are. It's giving you very good advice. And if you kind of make yourself quiet and listen hard and imagine that future self, could be tomorrow or 10 years from now or at the very end of your life, and ask, what is that future self? What is he or she trying to tell me about the decisions I have to make today? Well, it's a kind of time travel, and I think that future self, who's older and wiser by definition than any of us, is giving you really good advice. We just have to listen. Thank you very much.
All right. Well done. Thank you very much.